That's me, parked on top of a natural bridge. Today, Arches National Park doesn't even let you walk across the span, yet here I am in the year 2000 driving over one in a 2-ton SUV. It's a shocking image to see today, so how did I end up there? Today we're going to retrace the trail to Gemini Bridges. Well, most of it. Today, we aren't driving across the spans. Instead, we're revisiting the Gemini Bridges trail to look at the history, the geology, and how we can all become better stewards of the land we love. The trail to Gemini Bridges begins just off Highway 191, just south of the Moab Giants Museum. This ridge feels man-made, perfectly straight and elevated like a former railroad bed, but it's actually a levee. Its purpose is to divert flash flood runoff away from the Potash Railroad, which sits tucked inside that deep man-made trench blasted in the 1960s between the highway and this road. It's one of those hidden engineering details of the past that you never notice until you know it's there. To reach Little Canyon hanging high above Moab, we have to navigate this shelf road carved into the cliffside. Long before it was a destination for four-wheel drives, this was a rugged cattle trail. Moab ranchers used it to push livestock up onto the grazing lands of Arth's Pasture. But when the uranium boom hit in the 1950s, the cattle trail was bulldozed and widened to accommodate heavy machinery and ore trucks. If you stop and look closely at the hillsides, you can still see the old prospect scars and cat trails left behind by the miners searching for a strike. One of the most notable sites here is the Gemini Mine. It's a classic rim stripping operation, a common sight during the peak of the 1950s uranium rush. Between 1952 and 1958, this mine was a steady producer, feeding ore into the regional mill that is now a Superfund site just south of Arches National Park's entrance. The trail is definitely rougher than I remember. It seems most of Moab routes these days are. The heavy use of high horsepower side-by-sides with their aggressive knobby tires tends to strip away the top layers of dirt and sand. What's left behind is just the raw, jagged rock of the trail. You don't need a complex, heavily modified rig for this. My Tacoma is a fairly basic setup. Stock suspension, all-terrain tires, and rock sliders to protect the bodywork. That said, you'd absolutely want four-wheel drive and decent ground clearance. There are a few places on the trail that have a slight chance to hit the frame if you're not on the right line. I've spent a lot of time up here. This canyon was home to my favorite campsite in the Moab area, where I spent countless Jeep safaris. I have vivid memories of those nights spent climbing back up this cliff after dinners and drinks in town, only to descend again at dawn to meet up with the folks who can afford hotels. Because of those late night returns, this specific stretch of Little Canyon was my testing ground for off-road lighting. I've navigated these ledges in the pitch black with almost every light bar setup imaginable over the years. It's a place that feels very familiar to me in the dark or the noonday sun. Once you're up top on the cliffs, the trail leads towards Bride Canyon. This used to be my secret spot, the perfect tucked away campsite. But like many things in Moab, the secret's out.
Oh,
Getting a little
yikes.
crazy.
This truck's like, oh shit. Think maybe no.
Yeah, that's just a little.
I don't think it's gonna give us the payoff that we want.
I think I could handle it, but I don't bother with it.
Yeah.
Today, this is an officially marked camping area. The days of dispersed camping along the Gemini Bridges trail are over. You're restricted to only the designated sites along the trail now. This canyon is dominated by a massive spire, fittingly called the Bride by rock climbers. Other climbs in the canyon having names like Shotgun Wedding, Cold Feet, and Honeymoon. The spire itself is shaped like a bride with a bouquet and a tiara. If you keep your eyes on the rims, you'll see several small arches hiding in the Wingate cliffs. It's a fantastic place to camp because of the narrow walls provide a natural windbreak from the desert winds you get out on the open mesas. We visited during the first week of February, and the desert was still holding on to its winter coat. In the shadows, the ice and frost hadn't given up yet. It's that odd time of year in the southwest where the difference between a pleasant afternoon and a miserable frigid day is simply whether or not the sun is warming your body. Continuing up the canyon, we pass Gooneybird Rock. It's a landmark that a lot of trail videos seem to skip, which is a shame because it's so distinctive. Personally, I've always thought it looks a little bit more like a penguin than the lace and albatross that it was named after. The backstory of the name itself comes from Diana Webb, whose husband, Charles Schultz Sr., founded the Red Rock Four-Wheelers, the club that started Moab Easter Jeep Safari. As the story goes, Diana named it back in the late 60s as a distraction to keep her kids occupied and to stop them from fighting in the back of the Jeep. The name stuck and has been a staple of Moab geography ever since. There's some old school Jeep lore tied to this rock too. They say if you drive over the Gooney Bird's toes, you'll have good luck on the trail. But if you're too aggressive and drive on its ankles, the bird will curse you by flipping your rig. While the legend is fun, I prefer to show my respect to the Gooney Bird in a different way, by keeping all my tires on the dirt. Minimizing our impact is the best way to ensure that this luck doesn't run out for the next generation. The drive across Arth's Pasture towards Highway 131 junction offers some of the best vistas in the region. The landscape here feels almost intentionally designed to provide massive layered views. I even found myself stopping to take a photo at nearly the exact same spot I did a quarter century ago. A reminder of how much has changed and how much hasn't. We took the spur road down into Bull Canyon to stand beneath the bridges. This section is significantly more demanding than the main trail in the highlands. Plus, since you're driving on the river wash, you never know how it has changed in recent floods. Sometimes it's easy. When we were going over, the rocky riverbed was just super bouncy. We were going really slow to get through this canyon. In the old days, you could drive right up under the spans, but today the trail ends in a designated parking area with a short quarter-mile hike to the base. It's a perfect spot for a quiet picnic. We brought sandwiches from Sweet Cravings in town and just took in the scale of nature's erosion above us. The way these bridges formed is fascinating. They are technically pothole natural bridges. It starts on the surface where water collects in small depressions and slowly bores downward. The water seeps into tiny vertical fractures in the sandstone, weakening the rock from the inside, leading to fractures creating alcoves in the cliff face below. Eventually, the pothole above and the alcove eroding from below meet, creating a hole. But why two bridges here? Well, if you look at the surrounding canyons, you'll see that the rock is fractured in long parallel lines called joints, creating those famous sandstone fins and towers Moab is known for. Gemini Bridges formed because two of these parallel fractures were positioned right next to each other, and instead of weathering away into two separate fins, the water bored through the center of the fractures, leaving two massive spans of Wingate sandstone standing side by side. It's a unique double feature of geology. But to really understand the scale and the danger, we have to get out of this canyon and go look at them from the top. There's some epic carpets of cactus. Not hard to avoid, but when you have a one-eyed dog with depth perception issues, you have to keep an eye out. If you're coming in from the Highway 313 side, this stretch is easily passable for most two-wheel drive vehicles. Not at all the terrain we've been climbing through. Gemini Bridges was originally called Stewart Twins for the daughters of Clive Stewart in the 1930s. It was rediscovered in 1957 by Lynn Ottinger and Fred Barnes, who called it Gemini Bridges and submitted the name to the USGS in 1968. As you approach the bridges from the top, the trail becomes much more manageable. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was no clear line where the road ended and the hiking trail began. The ledges were just rough enough to act as a natural filter. But for those of us willing to coax our rigs over the rocks, the reward was being able to drive right across the spans. At the time, this was seen as a rite of passage to prove your vehicle's abilities and also your own bravery to drive on a narrow span that drops off on both sides. Looking back, it's a terrible idea. Even a span as thick as Gemini's can't simply ignore the stress of a 2-ton vehicle, let alone a bunch every summer. In 2008, the BLM moved to close the spur routes that were leading to this kind of abuse. At the time, the off-roading community was up in arms. There was a lot of anger over lost access. I bring this up because we always see history repeat itself. Every few years, a new round of closures hits, and the community reacts with the same frustration and anger that they dare block vehicle access. But I want to ask you, when you first saw those pictures of me parked on the arch, did you think, that's a bad idea, that shouldn't be allowed? Back then, the people fighting the BLM thought the government had gone too far. Today, most of us look back at that photo and see exactly why it had to be done. It's a reminder that how we've always done it isn't always the right way to keep doing it. Whether it's driving over a fragile natural rock sculpture or leaving black rubber marks across the slick rock where they don't need to be, our collective impact eventually reaches a breaking point. I recognize now that I was a part of the problem. Because of my actions and the actions of people like me, they had to make a new rule.
See, because of me, now they have a warning.
Growing and improving through change isn't something to be ashamed of. I've grown enough to know that there's some places that are meant to be seen, not driven on. No matter how much we think we're doing enough to preserve the land, we can always strive to be a little better. If we don't work together to protect these places, eventually no one will be able to enjoy them at all. As we leave the bridges behind, the trail transitions into an easy, scenic cruise back towards the pavement of Highway 313. It's a different kind of drive than the one that brought us here. No more shelf roads, no more cat trails or mining ruins, just a steady, quiet roll across the high desert. I've come to appreciate these easy stretches. They give you a chance to think about where you've been and where you're going next. Looking back at the 25-year-old photo of me on the arch, I realized that growth isn't about losing access, it's about gaining a better perspective. I was part of the problem. Because of my actions and others like me, the rules had to change. But changing with the times isn't something to be ashamed of. Today I've learned enough to know that this desert is much more fragile than it looks, and if you want to keep enjoying it as it is now, we need to learn to minimize our impact. Some of these gorgeous parts of our desert are meant to be seen, not driven on. There's still plenty of roads to drive all over the place, and plenty of places to take you to trailheads, so it's not that long of a hike to see some amazing stuff. You don't have to have a road going to the top of every mountain, just like we don't need an escalator to the top of Mount Everest. Thanks for coming along with this trip through Bull Canyon and Gemini Bridges.